Chapter 13. The Cavern. From his place of concealment, Conan peered warily at the leaping flames and the burly guards in iron and leather. He licked his lips, but otherwise stood motionless, as if awaiting some signal that would launch him into battle with these brutes. For there appeared to be no way to gain entry to the cavern, except by force. Subutai seemed unhappy. A thief rejoices in his mastery of the furtive arts, and a straightforward fight tests none of the larcenous skills on which he prides himself. At length he whispered, "Must we fight our way in, Cimmerian? I'm no coward, Erlich knows, but it seems folly to seek our goal against such odds, when by craft and stealth we could gain our ends unscathed." Valeria nodded. "They have their backs to us. That gives us some advantage." Conan grunted assent. "They know nothing of the entrance from the gorge, if the old wizard spoke true." "He's been right so far," murmured Valeria. Conan growled something inarticulate. The young Cimmerian was spoiling for a fight. His blood was up, and he yearned to repay his enemies for the sufferings they had inflicted on him. Still, he realized that to reveal their presence so early would lose them the advantage of surprise. Subutai, whose darting glances had been studying their surroundings, whispered excitedly, "Look, over there, to the left. See you those clusters of rock columns freestanding from the cavern wall? They'll make a screen for us if we can scramble along the cave side without making too much noise." "It is narrow," objected Valeria, "and the wall juts out in places. You and I might get through, but what of Conan?" Conan grinned. "I don't mind leaving a little skin behind, if I must," he grunted. "I'd get rid of this oily muck on my hide at least." Led by Subutai, they threaded their way along the cavern wall, their progress curtained by the stalagmites that rose like giants' teeth from the bedrock. Their rude path led upward, so that, when they paused to survey the scene from a break in the rocky curtain, they found themselves looking down across the whole immensity of the cavern floor. They saw in the centre a huge cauldron upheld by 4 massive posts of blackened stone, the vessel itself of some substance that, from the distance, looked like stone. Flames roared up from fire pits cut out of the rocky floor, the leaping blaze clawing the smoky air. All around the cauldron, huge, sweat-covered beastmen worked to feed the flames beneath the vast cookpot, while other hairy workers struggled with some contraption that stirred the steaming contents. Great chunks of boiling meat floated in the bubbling pool, while ape-like butchers cut up other carcasses to add to the aromatic stew. Beyond the cookpot stretched the generous dining hall, furnished with trestle tables and benches made of logs. Suddenly, the 3 intruders stiffened and stared in disbelief. Hung from the meat hooks to one side of the great cauldron, half hidden by the steam and the flickering firelight, they saw human bodies, drawn and bloodless, like those of beef sides or plucked fowl. From the delicate, almost translucent flesh that covered the pallid faces and immobile limbs, it was clear that the victims had once been pilgrims to the mountain of power, followers of the serpent god. As the 3 adventurers watched in horror, a pair of beastmen hacked up one body with their cleavers, and trotting over to the cauldron, tossed the pieces into the boiling liquid. Valeria turned pale, and buried her face against Conan's shoulder. The Cimmerian swore an oath beneath his breath. Subutai retched. Fortunately, the rhythmic beating of the drums increased in volume and masked the telltale sound. As the noise swelled, the watcher's attention focused on the frenzied beating, which filled the cavern with reverberating echoes. The drums were as huge as the cauldron, the taut hides stretched across each top, set to vibrating, not by hands or drumsticks, but by the bare feet of grotesque, capering figures. The dancing figures, either naturally as hirsute as beasts or wrapped closely in the skins of wild animals, seemed oddly deformed. The shadows they cast in the uncertain light of the flames wore the shape of fiends from the nethermost reaches of hell. "What manner of man or devil are they?" whispered Subutai incredulously. Conan shrugged, remembering the hulking anthropoid guards whom he had passed on his way into the temple. The whispers of the raiders were silenced by the clank of armor. They shrank back into the deeper gloom as a squad of hairy men in metal-mounted leather marched into the dining hall, tugged off their helmets, and settled down to feed. Soon they were joined by a straggle of latecomers whose noisy gruntings added to the din. Conan jerked a peremptory thumb to urge his companions on. Proceeding with utmost caution, they circled past the seething cauldron with its ghastly contents, and in time came to another section of the cavern used as a dwelling place by the cave folk. Here, the women and the children of the troglodytes, as ugly as the males, pursued their domestic affairs. "Trolls," muttered Subutai, his eyes widening. "The legends of my people tell of them." Valeria shook her head. "No, they are the descendants of an ancient race who dwelt in caves from times beyond man's memory." "How could they have thus sunk to the level of beasts?" muttered the small Hyrcanian. Valeria said, "From what I have heard, such is not the case. They are not men who have become animals, but animals who have almost grown to men. My people say that long, long ago, there were two branches of man, our forebears and these shadow dwellers. My ancestors called them that because these beast men could not endure the light of day and chose to make their home in the hollows beneath the earth. When our forebears spread out across the land, seeking the daylight and the fertile earth, these shadow dwellers burrowed ever deeper into the ground. And fed on human flesh," added Subutai disgustedly. Valeria nodded. "This doom must breed them here for his unholy purposes. He feeds them on the bodies of his cult worshippers or on those he teaches his followers to kill." Conan glowered. "That's how the snake prophet protects his mindless children, with an army of cannibal beastmen whose bellies are filled with the fools who follow him. Or those who wish to follow him no more," said Subutai. Beyond the living quarters of the cave folk, the three raiders reached the far end of the great cavern and found themselves confronted by a bridge of thong-bound poles suspended between two mammoth logs. This narrow bridge spanned a wide, deep fissure which had been opened up in eons past by some violent convulsion within the mountain. Beyond this obstacle, they perceived a generous, man-made portal through which shone a strange, opalescent light. Seeing no guard about, they ventured into the open, with Subutai, arrow-nocked, in the lead. Suddenly, at the far end of the bridge, an ape-like boy appeared. About 4 feet tall, the beast child was already of a muscular, stocky build that bespoke enormous strength. Pulling a hatchet from his girdle, he snarled and gesticulated wildly. Then he charged. "They can't talk," rumbled Conan, preparing to defend himself and the girl behind him. Even as the Cimmerian spoke, a bowstring twanged, and the boy stood transfixed by an arrow. He shrieked, staggered, and tumbled into the chasm. Subutai sighed. He was only a boy. Yes, but he would have grown up, said Valeria. Let's move on. Led by the incandescent greenish glow, they hastened through the unguarded portal and found themselves in a narrow hallway, such as servants use when attending to the orders of their masters. There was no sign of any who might challenge them, yet they moved on furtive feet, hugging the wall to take advantage of every shadow. "This must be the entrance for the guards of Thulsa Doom," muttered Conan, "and of those who serve the faithful followers of Set." Subutai nodded. "And since they are all servants of the snake god, Doom feels no need to post a sentinel here." "Let's still go with caution," said Valeria. "We do not know what awaits us further on." Stealthily, they proceeded along the hall and up a rock-hewn stairway, and much amazed, they found themselves at the threshold of a chamber draped in filmy gauze to form, as it were, a pavilion through which the green light pulsed. Around it, half hidden by the translucent curtains, as by an evening mist, the astonished intruders saw graceful trees and beds of delicate-hued flowers, planted in soil-filled hollows to recreate a garden within the confines of the cave. The floor of polished blue-black marble gleamed like the still waters of a lake, and from silver vessels incense curled upward through the motionless air. Above the distant throbbing of the drums, a flute sang like a nightingale to weave a sense-seducing spell. Into the ethereal glow of this fairyland crept the three raiders, gliding like insubstantial shadows from shrub to shrub. Behind the draperies of the pavilion, they perceived dozens of young people of both sexes, clad in gossamer, or not at all. Some lay in slumber, others languidly made love, yet others sat in death-like trance, their backs propped up against the slender columns of malachite, which upheld the draperies that formed the place of pleasure. So slowly did the pleasure-seekers move, if indeed they moved at all, that Conan looked at his companions and wordlessly formed the word, "drugged." Subutai's quick glance picked out one guard, and then another, their anthropoid hairy bodies stretched out in swinish sleep, beside those whose guardians they were. Even the leopards, chained to a column, had been affected by the potent narcotic that wafted upward with the incense, for they had laid their slumberous heads between their paws and closed their eyes of molten gold. Suddenly, Valeria touched Conan's arm and pointed. With a shock, Conan recognized his ancient enemy. Thulsa Doom sat in an alcove, in a trance-like state, his legs and arms crossed, his head bowed, the better to inhale a spiral of drugged vapour that rose from a carven bowl placed on a brazier. Before him knelt Princess Yasmina of Shadizar. Her transparent garment had fallen from her shoulders, exposing the gentle swell of her high breasts. While two handmaidens chanted an exotic paean in a strange language, the princess, like one sunk in a sensual dream, slowly undulated her naked torso and ran eager hands up and down her bare thighs. Her head was thrown back, her eyes half closed, and she licked her lips with the tip of her tongue. Lethargically, Doom raised his head and feasted his eyes on the girl's exposed beauty. "The princess," whispered Valeria. Conan nodded. His blue eyes blazed with anger and disgust. "So this must be the paradise of Set," murmured Subutai. "The prophet might convert me from the worship of Erlich if the women were as wakeful as they are willing." Valeria eyed him coldly. Then, turning to Conan, she breathed, "What now?" But he made no answer. "If we wait a while," Subutai replied, "they will all fall asleep. And then? What say you, Cimmerian?" Two pairs of eyes sought Conan's face, but his attention was riveted to the wall of the alcove, wherein Doom and Yasmina were lost in their narcotic dreams. Valeria gasped. Never had she seen such an expression on Conan's face. Hate and animal ferocity possessed the Cimmerian's countenance, and with it a heart-aching sadness that lay too deep for tears. Valeria and Subutai directed a questing glance at the jade-green wall behind the cult leader and his priestess. There, supported by two silver pegs, hung a heavy broadsword, the crossguard fashioned in the form of a stag's antlers, and the pommel shaped like the hooves of elk. Long and superbly crafted was the blade, and its polished length flashed like a mirror in the dim green light. It was a work of art, a weapon of pure Atlantean steel. The sword forged by Conan's father.